And I'm going to show you some of the work that actually we have done well before COVID on informed citizen panel. So it's a little bit older work, but nonetheless, I was asked to present it because we are going to build on this now also in this Sweet Pathfinder project and develop that. So I'll present this as say one of the methodologies that we are working with and we are developing. So basically, of course, in Sweet Pathfinder and many other projects, we are working with the questions, for example, if we look at the electricity mix only, so how could and should the Swiss electricity mix look like in the year 2035 or even beyond the year 2050? And actually, in principle, we have two types of responses that we can get from academic research. On the one hand, we many of us use energy models, electricity system models, so we can do scenarios, what if analysis and quantitative analysis to show, you know, for example, here at the time when we did this work, so it was, I think, 2019 or so, we compiled that there were 18 studies in Switzerland with 80 scenarios of the Swiss electricity mix. And you can see here in blue, it's actually hydropower. So this is pretty set across the scenarios for the year 2035. But then in terms of the rest of the technologies, you can actually get quite lots of variation. And that's what models are, of course, good at, because they can show the different what if analysis. And on the other hand, we can also, you know, when it comes to public preferences or citizen engagement, so a very common tool is to do surveys. So here's just one example of the something called consumer barometer, which is done every year by the University of St. Gallen, where at some point, I think it's also the year 2019, there's how should the goal of 11 terawatt hours of additional electricity be reached in Switzerland. So that's after nuclear phase out. And you can see in a large survey with more than 1,000 citizens, there's lots of course, hydropower, solar power, and wind power in Switzerland. But in fact, you can never find really an equivalent scenario in the modeling community, meaning that at the moment we have really this split between, you know, the kind of evidence that comes from modeling and the kinds of evidence that comes in surveys. And that's the first challenge. Then there's a second challenge that actually when surveys are done, so you might get a question that asks, you know, what for the Swiss electricity demand in the year 2035, which options do you prefer? Is it hydropower or solar photovoltaic? And then you mark on, you know, which options you like more than others. But if you have filled any kind of survey before, which you did, you know that we usually fill them very fast. If we don't maybe understand fully the question, we still fill the answer just to be able to press the next button. So actually there we also don't know how reliable these responses are or how good the quality of these responses are. And so just one example is if we take a lesser known technology like enhanced geothermal systems. So at some point we had a series of interviews done with citizens in German-speaking part of Switzerland, where we actually tried to understand what do they understand when they hear something like enhanced geothermal systems or deep geothermal. And the kind of things that come up are, they can install that in your house, right? So it's clear that someone is mixing up that with heat pumps, which is quite a big mistake. Then it says, yeah, it could lead to a small volcanic eruption. Are there power plants that work with natural gas, really? And biomass, I don't know that at all. And actually, just to say, you know, I'm picking some phrases that really came from real interviews. These are very prevalent, so they are not, how to say, I think maybe we had a sample of about 14 or 16 citizens, and these things already come up. So that just shows how often actually when people read the surveys, they might not necessarily know what we actually mean. So in our group, we developed this a novel approach, which is called the Informed Citizen Panels, which aims to address both of the challenges that I've shown before. So the Informed Citizen Panels, they work like that. So we gather a group of citizens. I will show you later how we do it and who they are. But basically, then we take them through the process that is a longitudinal process. So first of all, we select them to have some representativeness. And then here we did it on electricity generation, electricity supply. So we prepared some fact sheets for them to read. So fact sheets mean that, you know, here it's in German. There can be, so it's 2 pages per technology, like large hydropower, but you can read about everything, like today's situation, future potential, about various impacts on climate change and life cycle impacts, of course, climate change, pollution, so air pollution, influence on so biodiversity, on risks and costs and electricity supply security and so on. And then in addition to these fact sheets, there's also a table that helps you compare different technologies here on this side. And there are different impacts in the impact categories. And actually, if you are interested in any of this work, so we all have them all available publicly in Zenodo in multiple languages. So then people read these materials at home, and then they come for the workshop with us. At the beginning of the workshop, we actually test them to make sure that they have read. So it's a little bit like students in the exam, but because we really want to only involve citizens that have spent time with our materials. And here we start, so they start by, of course, it's all a facilitated workshop, but first of all, there's a discussion in a group. So this is one of the ways how they, you know, it's an additional opportunity for them to form their opinions by also hearing the opinions of others. And for now, it's about the individual technologies. And then here, later in the workshop, we also introduce something called Risk Meter, which is an interactive tool that we have. It's also available online, so you can use it if you would like. And basically for here, what we ask them, so the risk meter in the case of Switzerland looks like that. You need to choose the different technologies. So how much of, for example, solar photovoltaic or wind power would you like to have in your preferred electricity mix for Switzerland for the year 2035? And you need to do that until basically you fill the whole electricity demand. And here there's also import, and there's electricity savings and efficiency as well. And basically the kind of mixes you reproduce here are consistent with the kind of modeling results that we would in principle get. So basically in other words, we let these citizens choose among the scenarios from models to find their preferred scenario. Then they again discuss in a group. Now it's about the electricity mix to further settle their opinions. And at that moment, we say, you know, now we really have this, what we call informed citizen panel. So these are not the citizens that were, you know, just quickly answered some survey questions online without thinking much. They really spent quite some time reading these materials, and he already spent, you know, more than 2 hours in a workshop. So they have thought about the topic, basically, so to say. And then we also let them go home and let them continue thinking about the topic. And we follow up with them in several weeks of time. And what I'll show you is actually through this process, we also document how public preferences evolve from, you know, before the process all to the end. So also in this way, we can understand what is the role of that information plays in the formation of the preferences. So now I'll show you some how we have applied it. So one of these citizen panels we had was in the city of Geneva, and I think it was in 2019. And so I have to say these are expensive exercises because, of course, we pay these participants for their time. So that's why we can only recruit a relatively small end. So here we had 33 participants. And actually, so we start with a bigger pool of participants that we recruit blind in terms of topics, so they don't know that they are, they express interest basically to participate in a workshop on scientific topic, but they don't know it's for energy. And then we ask them to fill a preparation survey where actually we ensure that we select a group of people that have very diverse initial views on the future electricity supply. So in other words, that they're both proponents and opponents of nuclear power, and the same for solar PV and so on, because in this way we really, for them the learning effect is the biggest because they are exposed to various opinions. And then in terms of social demographics, we aim, of course, for somewhat representative sample, but with small n, it's a that's one of the limitations we need to live with. So basically, in this case, in the case of Geneva, we had slightly younger participants on average than the Swiss population, but 50% of female and still a little bit more educated, but that also happens in large cities. And one of the main questions that we ask, so we have asked many questions, but one of the main one is, to what extent do you agree with the further development of these electricity technologies in Switzerland in 2035? And what you see here, it's already basically before we start the process, even before the citizen panels, we ask this question also as in the survey. And here now it's a 7-point Likert scale. So there's a neither agree nor disagree line. So the neutral line is here. And then it's completely disagree 1 and completely agree 7. And what you see here is also something that very often comes in any survey that is done in Switzerland. So there's quite high preferences, and that's especially the case in Geneva for electricity savings and efficiency. But then basically all renewable electricity technologies like hydropower, solar, wind, geothermal, biogas, biomass, waste incineration, they're still put also in this basically above the neutral line, meaning that they are rather preferred by the citizens. And below there are three technologies that are judged negatively. So nuclear power, large natural gas power plants, and net import. So that's net, we explain that net is net, so meaning that it's still Switzerland exchanges with abroad on an hourly basis. So that's before the process. Now, when they go through this process with us, and the moment that I marked with a star before as informed citizen panel, what you can actually see is that their opinions change, and sometimes changed quite a lot. So there are some opinions that don't change practically or move a little bit. For example, for electricity savings, hydropower, solar photovoltaic, or large hydropower. And here what we see is basically that these are technologies and options that people are already well familiar with, and they have quite a robust, they have made their mind. So basically, even in our fact sheets, we also speak about the negative impacts of solar photovoltaic as well as the positive ones. So it's always balanced in terms of pros and cons. Actually, this information changes their opinions very relatively little. The same happens also for nuclear power and net import. So here again, nuclear is a good example. The opinions are already so strong and so basically robust that people do not seem to react to any new information from our sheet. So that also shows that once the citizen opinions are there, they might be difficult to change. And then there are other technologies, especially new technologies, that actually really shift. So one example is deep geothermal. So these enhanced geothermal systems that I also showed before that are less maybe known in the case of Switzerland. And we can see here that actually so at the beginning people, put that together in the same category as all renewables in a way. But then when they learn about the cause and the earthquake risk and yeah, other potential negative impacts of this technology, it actually falls and even beyond this this neutral line. And interestingly, the same happens even more for natural gas, because what we realize is also that people do not seem to always realize that natural gas has impact on climate change. So that's an additional point that, so climate change, there are actually two elements, climate change and that it's imported. So it's a bit also like net electricity import, but actually that after the information that falls even further. And so in fact here, you know, what we see is also that one would need to be relatively careful with any results that we get from surveys, because there are, especially for these newer technologies, indeed there are really quite some, there might be quite some changes when people actually realize what it is and what it means. And then we also ask the same question 4 weeks later. And actually what we see here, that there's really also from this process a learning effect. So deep geothermal and both natural gas, they show that quite well, so that these opinions stay. Now, actually, some years before, so in 2017, so I'm really presenting this time quite a bit earlier work. We actually have done also such panels in the case of Zurich. So here it's for 46 people. Again, the exact same process, somewhat representative, but indeed we focused more on ensuring that there's a diversity of initial opinions. And actually there, what we saw is a relatively similar pattern, except that in the case of Zurich, there's higher preference for solar photovoltaic, and a bit, you know, in the case of Geneva, efficiency and savings were by far on top. The interesting, it's something similar happens also to the geothermal and natural gas. It's interesting, there's quite a steep learning of run-of-river hydropower. And I think that may have something to do with the fact that actually in the city center of Geneva, there is a hydropower, so run-of-river hydropower dam. So maybe it's a more familiar technology, that because in the case of Zurich, that was not, how to say, that was, you see, the lowest renewable technology, but that then jumped together to be close to hydropower dams once people actually realized what it is. Now, what we also did, so that was technology by technology, but as I showed you, we also asked for the technology mix and information. And here what you see is basically the average technology mix now for these citizens in Geneva. The red line is basically the minimum that they could choose of each of those technologies, because, for example, for hydropower, it already exists. So we basically create a new mix based on what exists already. We do not unbuild at least renewable generation. And then, but they could choose to reduce nuclear power, because currently nuclear power is higher up. And here now what you see here is in white the average mix, and basically the outcomes here are that people still, so despite, you know, these likes and dislikes of different technologies, they still choose in general a relatively diverse mix. But they do tend to include lots of new renewables. So even geothermal comes in here, even if I showed you before that it drops below the neutral line. But there's no natural gas on average and no net import. And I don't know how much of you know about Geneva, but actually, so that's the canton of Geneva. It's completely surrounded by France. It has more than 100 kilometers of border with France and only 4 kilometers with Switzerland. But nonetheless, in the minds of the citizens, this import and basically willingness to be independent from import and net import is so strong that even in this case, there's really, yeah, basically net import is that what they are choosing. Here it's actually the same graph, just for this case of Zurich. Again, you see there's something very, very similar. like that. So lots of renewables, no natural gas, and no net import. So it seems that really, even if we do these processes in different, in cities that are quite far apart, there's some convergence. So that's what what we did with these informed citizen panels. Now the question is also, how does that inform the modeling activities that we do? Because I go back to this first challenge that I showed. We have so many different model scenarios that were published at the time we did this work, and then of course, how does that compare with these views of informed citizens? So here we did first of all, a very small study for Switzerland, and I'll show we did a bigger study for Europe. But here, what we did, so first of all, we also sent basically this risk meter for the electricity mix. It can be also used in a survey, of course. So here we did a very small survey of only 60 participants, but we sent them basically, this risk meter as online survey, but they are representative as far as 60 people can be representative. Then we also have these informed citizens, so both Zurich and Geneva, and we also sent risk meters to the Swiss energy experts. So at the time, these were members of the various Swiss competence centers for energy research. And here now, when we compare, so what we see, so here these model-based scenarios of electricity supply that were published in Switzerland in this time until 2019, basically. So here one unit that I chose is the share of domestic renewable electricity generation. And you can see that in the modeled scenarios, there's quite a share. So from a little bit at around 50 to nearly 100%, you can find many different alternatives. Now, if we put on that these citizens that use the risk meter, so submitted their responses in the risk meter, we actually see also that there's quite broad range of choices, but on average, there's still more ambitions in terms of renewables, domestic renewables. If I show these informed citizens that went through the panels, so again, it's especially the ones in Geneva, they are even more ambitious than in Zurich, but actually you see here they're quite high, and they're well even of more at the level with their average of these outlier scenarios in the case of models. And now, of course, it's interesting to know what energy experts have chosen also in the risk meter. So we see that actually the choice of energy experts becomes relatively similar somewhat to these informed citizen panels. So meaning that, with these materials, we were to some extent able to bring the citizens to somewhat really closer to this more expert knowledge and expert choice. And this is always, of course, by the, we are speaking about preferred scenarios for 2035. But at the same time, you see how big the gap is, even between the citizen preferences and even experts as well as model-based scenarios. And we can, of course, here dive a bit more in detail. So the big differences are solar photovoltaic that are much more preferred by the citizens and the experts, but that is not represented in the case of models. And then also fossil fuel-based generation and net import are the big differences. The last question is this only the case of Switzerland that we have this big gap between, what we see from models and scenarios and citizens? So actually we have done a series of studies. So they are published here in Energy Strategy Reviews and Renewable and Sustainable Energy Transition journals on analyzing this for France, Germany, Poland, and 27 European countries together. So this risk meter, it exists also for the European countries and as well for France, for Germany, for Poland as individual countries. And so here just one example to show, for citizens of France, Germany, and Poland. We asked them, about their individual countries, but also about EU27. And here these are really representative samples, about 200 citizens each. And this is a risk meter in an online survey. And here we did also a systematic review of all European scenarios for the electricity generation since 2008. So there was about 300 scenarios. And now I just show some selected highlight results, but of course I said that this work is published, so you can look up more technologies if you would like. What we see here again is very similar, like in the case of Switzerland. So blue are the models. So we see again that the citizens are way more on average ambitious than the models. And you see the range is actually, so modeling range is even broader than what we have in the risk meter, but nonetheless, it's really more, so the models tend to be quite conservative. And this, of course, also has something to do with the limitations of existing models. However, the difference is not as big for wind power, although there are some country differences. Nuclear power is another big difference, where models actually have way more nuclear power than citizens would like to see. And even in the case of Germany, we see how big the difference is. Citizens would like to see less natural gas and less coal, so they basically do prefer more decarbonized electricity systems than what we see in the case of models for 2035. So that's now let's go to the final wrap up and the summary. So I showed that preferences of informed citizen panels differ from those that I elicited in conventional surveys, especially for new technologies where stable opinions do not exist yet. So in that sense, if you ever use a survey, be very careful, because it basically it does not show the necessarily a high quality of responses that we get. In the case of Switzerland, we found high and stable support for most new renewable electricity technologies and efficiency, and low support for nuclear power, fossil fuel-based plants, and net electricity import. Even if there were over 80 electricity supply scenarios at the time we did this work, there was no single scenario that would represent the future that is close to anything that was preferred by the citizens, be it from the surveys or from informed citizen panels. But here, Switzerland is not an exception; it's more really a stone that is thrown to our whole energy modeling community. I think we need to revise and rethink how we do models and what kind of scenarios we do. And finally, of course, I'm presenting here, it's work that was done quite some time, but in the case of Pathfinder, we will be now further developing this approach of informed citizen panels, but this time now going more beyond the electricity sector and also looking into issues of flexibility, sector coupling, and net zero emissions system. So thanks so much for being here, and I'm happy to answer any questions.